This is Derick Varn with a jar full of currency from around the world to introduce our second step in our series on reification. And this time we're purely sticking to Marxist ideas. We'll come back to some of these other non-Marxist uses of the term, but in this jar we hold one of the primary fetishes of our age. In fact, I hold many different social relationships in this jar. Why different social relationships, you might ask, as I put the jar down. This is from Egypt. This is from Venezuela. This is from Turkey. From Egypt again. And so you can see here that different cultures, different states, different social relations are actually hidden in every one of those little slips of plastic or paper. And every bit of tin and nickel in this jar. And this brings us to the concept of commodity fetishism. Now, normally when we teach Marxist steps of reification, one would start not with this jar of money, but with the theory of alienation coming in from Hegel. Social alienation from the self, from the species essence, right? But that is a more nebulous way to understand reification. In fact, in some ways, the most thingified element of an abstract relationship is embodied in something like this. Now, instead of starting with alienation, we will understand Marx's reification through commodity fetishism. Often it is posited that commodity fetishism is a refinement of Marx's theory of alienation, but it's actually more of a subcategorization to it. The theory of alienation goes back to Hegel. It's a big part of the driving force of the phenomenology of spirit, and it's also a big part of Ludwig Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity, R. Max Stirner's Ego and Their Own. You see alienation play a key role. It first comes to appearance in the Economic and Philosophic manuscripts of 1844. But while commodity fetishism is also taught as a refinement of the concept of alienation, Marx uses the term very early on. In fact, he first mentions it in 1842, and he's actually arguing with Karl Heinrich Hermes, who was defending the Prussian state's religious policies, which is somewhat irrelevant here, and made an argument regarding Hegel, where he agreed with Hegel that fetishization was making the sensuous turn towards the heaven, and Marx, in his normal inversion of Hegelian tropes, points out that no, what was happening in the fetish was making the abstract into the sensuous. So you might go, what does this have to do with commodities? And again, before we even get to the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, we already have in 1842 Marx talking about debates on the law of the theft of wood, where Marx spoke of Spanish fetishism of gold as equivalent to the German fetishization of wood as commodities, making a link to the prior ethnographic and religious usage used in Hermes and Hegel. And here's the exact quote from that 1842 Rheinische Zeitung article as translated into English. The savages of Cuba regarded gold as a fetish of the Spaniards. They celebrated a feast in its honor, sang a circle around it, and then threw it into the sea. If the Cuban savages had been present at the sitting of the Rhine Province Assembly, they would not have regarded wood as the Rhinelanders' fetish, but subsequent sitting would have taught them that the worship of animals is connected with this fetishism, and they would have thrown the hares into the sea in order to save the human beings. Now, Marx's obvious prejudice and language about acute of indigenous people aside, let's not get distracted by that here, but the main point. The main point is the worship of commodities and the relationships hidden in commodities would have been, in Marx's even early journalism, analogous to these religious fetishes. And that is because it is hiding an abstract relationship and making that abstract relationship represented in a thing. So the way that, the god is represented in the fetish, the social power relationship is represented in the commodity, and the commodity is represented in the currency. If your currency is not a commodity, currency. He makes even more hay of this in the exact same economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. Again, concurrent, not after, the fully fleshing out of his own version of the theory of alienation. And I will read the quote related to that. The nations which are still dazzled by the sensuous glitter of precious metals, and are therefore still fetish worshippers of metal money, are not yet fully developed money nations. Contrast France and England. The extent to which the solution of theoretical riddles is a task of practice, and is affected through practice, the extent to which true practice is conditioned, a real and positive theory is shown, for example, in fetishism. The sensuous consciousness of the fetish worshipper is different from that of the Greek, because his sensuous existence is different. The abstract enmity between sense and spirit is necessary as long as the human feelings for nature, the human sense of nature, and therefore also the natural sense of man, are not yet produced by man's own labor. And again, we see Marx here refining this concept in the commodity, manifesting as our way of dealing with abstractions that we make into something physical that we can interact with the world, something separate from ourselves and our ideas that's an actual thing, but also hides those ideas and stands in for them. And then this becomes even more tied together as we deal with the produce of labor. What we see here then is what Marx fully develops in Capital Volume 1, and I will give you the most pertinent quote. We find in the capitalist process of production an indissoluble fusion of use values in which capital subsist the means of production and the objects defined as capital when we are really faced with a definite social relationship in production. In consequence, the product embedded in the mode of production is equated with the commodity. By those who have to deal with it, it is the forms of the foundation of the fetishism of political economists. So by this point, you have all these notions of the fetish, of the abstract being made into a physical thing that you can hold, that substitutes in for these power relationships, for the production, for labor. All of this is embodied in, first, the commodity. And we'll just literally hold up a Coke can here, right? That's a commodity, and that stands in for something. But as I'm using it, it's not fetishized, right? There's no abstract relationship. All I like is this delicious beverage. But if I'm trading futures on the market, that represent the value of these Cokes, that is a fetish. And if I concretize that into this thing, for the power relationship hidden in the currency is, I have now fully instantiated and hidden masked the relationship in this commodity fetish. Now, this is the most literal form for Marx of reification. I am not just making an abstract a thing, as in confusing it, concretizing an abstraction, and we'll get into that in like analytic philosophy and stuff too in the series, but I am literally making the abstract implications of a social relationship into a physical thing, the way a early religious thinker may make a relationship to an abstract god into a physical, idol. Now, we must see through these fetishes because they mask so many relations and so many hidden things. And remember, theorizing with a hammer is about taking the hammer to the things that confuse you, that hide, that mask away, or that are empty and useless. There's nothing more important in understanding the way the economy works, even if you have a different theory of money than Marx, than seeing that money is not naturalized. It works because we believe it to work. We need it to work. It is concretized and has objective value because of the subjective social relationships behind it, manifested in the real world, the subjectified, and then hidden, because in the hiding we can hide many of the things going on in our social interactions, including all kinds of unfortunate power relationships, but most importantly, exploitation. On this basic level, this is what reification means to Marx. Now, next week, we'll still stay in Marx land, and I will go back and explicate the slightly more complicated and broad view of alienation. But until then, keep smashing those idols in your head.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.